This module will look at the service transition stage. The purpose of the service transition stage of the service lifecycle is to ensure that new, modified or retired services meet the expectations of the business, as documented in the service strategy and service design stages of the lifecycle. Given that the range of changes that could be made to a service could be small improvements all the way through to significant change, the scope of service transition is also significant. The scope includes the development and improvement of capabilities for transitioning new and changed services into supported environments, including release planning, building, testing, evaluation and deployment. The publication also considers service retirement and transfer of services between service providers. The guidance focuses on how to ensure that the requirements from service strategy, developed in service design, are effectively realised in service operation, while controlling the risks of failure and subsequent disruption. This includes managing the complexity associated with changes to services and service management processes, allowing for innovation while minimising the unintended consequences of change, introducing new services into the live environment, managing changes to existing services such as the expansion, reduction, change of supplier, acquisition or disposal of sections of user base or suppliers, change of requirements or skills availability, the decommissioning and discontinuation of services, applications or other service components, and the transfer of services to and from other service providers. There are a number of objectives which service transition is specifically looking to achieve, namely, to effectively and efficiently plan and manage service changes, to ensure that all risks that relate to new, changed or retired services are managed, to ensure successful deployment of service releases into supported environments, to ensure that the correct expectations on the performance and use of new or changed services have been set, to ensure that the changes to service create the expected business value, to ensure that good quality knowledge and information about services and service assets is provided to those that need it. These objectives can only be achieved if a number of key activities occur during the service transition lifecycle stage. These include planning and managing the capacity and resources required to manage changes to the existing services, a rigorous framework for testing and confirming the capabilities of a service and for managing risk of deployment before deployment, ensuring the integrity of service assets is maintained.
Within the service transition stage of the service lifecycle, there are 5 processes that we need to consider. They are 1. Transition planning and support. 2. Change management. 3. Release and deployment management. 4. Service asset and configuration management. 5. Knowledge management. We will discuss these processes in more detail over the remaining lessons of this module.
As the service transition stage of the lifecycle covers potentially the introduction of new or modification to and retirement of existing services, the areas of activity and the parties that need to be involved and included could be quite significant. For this reason, there needs to be a clear point of focus and coordination across the stage. The purpose of the transition planning and support process is to provide overall planning for service transitions and to coordinate the resources that they require. This process is effectively project management for service transition and would benefit greatly from the support of a recognised project management framework such as PRINCE2. With such a wide-ranging brief, the objectives of transition planning and support are significant. The process is tasked with planning and coordinating the resources to ensure that the requirements of service strategy encoded in service design are effectively realised in service operation. Coordinating the activities across projects, suppliers and service teams where required. Establishing new or changed services into their live supported environments within the predicted cost, quality and time estimates. establishing new or modified management information systems and tools, technology and management architectures, service management processes, and measurement methods and metrics to meet the requirements expected of them that were defined during the service design stage of the life cycle. Ensuring that all parties adopt the common framework of standard reusable processes and supporting systems in order to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the integrated planning and coordination activities. Providing clear and comprehensive plans that enable customer and business change projects to align their activities with the service transition plans. Identifying, managing and controlling risks to minimise the chance of failure and disruption across transition activities. And ensuring that service transition issues, risks and deviations are reported to the appropriate stakeholders and decision makers. Monitoring and improving the performance of the service transition lifecycle stage. The activities that are performed across service transition are quite wide-ranging, and as such the scope of transition planning and support will potentially include all the following aspects of service transition, namely maintaining policies, standards and models for service transition activities and processes, guiding each major change or new service through all the service transition processes, coordinating the efforts needed to enable multiple transitions to be managed at the same time, prioritising conflicting requirements for service transition resources, planning the budget and resources needed to fulfil future requirements for service transition, reviewing and improving the performance of transition planning and support activities, ensuring that service transition is coordinated with program and project management, service design and service development activities. Transition planning and support is not responsible for detailed planning of the build, test and deployment of individual changes or releases. These activities are carried out as part of change management and release and deployment management.
Changes to IT services are inevitable. They can be reactive in nature as a means of resolving errors and adapting to changing circumstances, and also proactive when organizations are seeking business benefits such as reduction in costs, improved services, or increased ease and effectiveness of support. Changes need to be effectively managed in order to ensure that an organization's risk exposure is optimized and the impact of change is well understood and managed to achieve a successful outcome and ensure the correct level of stakeholder engagement. An appropriate response to all requests for change entails a considered approach to assessment of risk and business continuity, change impact, resource requirements, change authorization, and especially to the realizable business benefit. This considered approach is essential to maintain the required balance between the need for change and the impact of that change. The purpose of the change management process is to control the life cycle of all changes, enabling beneficial changes to be made with minimum disruption to IT services. The objectives for delivering an effective change management process will include responding to the customer's changing business requirements while maximizing value and reducing incidents, disruption, and rework. Responding to the business and IT requests for change that will align the services with the business needs. Ensuring that changes are recorded and evaluated, and that authorized changes are prioritized, planned, tested, implemented, documented, and reviewed in a controlled manner. Ensuring that all changes to configuration items are recorded in the configuration management system. Optimizing overall business risk. It is often correct to minimize business risk, but sometimes it is appropriate to knowingly accept a risk because of the potential benefit. The scope of the change management process should include changes to all architectures, processes, tools, metrics, and documentation, as well as changes to IT services and other configuration items. All changes being recorded and managed in a controlled way. The scope of change management covers changes to all configuration items, in particular physical assets such as servers or networks, virtual assets such as virtual servers or virtual storage, or other types of asset such as agreements or contracts. Each organization should also take time to define those changes that lie outside the scope of its change management process. Typically, these might include changes with significantly wider impacts than service changes, such as departmental reorganizations. These changes, though, will produce requests for change to implement supporting service changes. Also, changes at an operational level, such as repairs to printers or other routine service components, should be excluded.
The change is raised by a request from the initiator, the individual or organisational group that requires the change. The level of detail recorded and requested depends on the size and impact of the change. The change record holds the full history of the change, incorporating information from the RFC and subsequently recording agreed parameters such as priority and authorization, implementation and review information. All RFCs received should be logged and allocated an identification number. As a change proceeds through its life cycle, the change document, related records such as work orders, and related configuration items are updated in the Configuration Management System or CMS, so that there is visibility of its status and compliance to the process. As changes are logged, change management should ensure that all required information has been provided and filter out any requests that seem to be impractical or are repeats of earlier requests for change or are incomplete submissions. These should be returned to the initiator, together with brief details of the reason for the rejection. A right of appeal against rejection should exist. The potential impact on the services of failed changes and their impact on service assets and configurations need to be considered. Key questions which must be answered for all changes include: who raised the change? What is the reason for the change? What is the return required from the change? What are the risks involved in the change? What resources are required to deliver the change? Who is responsible for the build, test and implementation of the change? What is the relationship between this change and other changes? Change management is responsible for ensuring that changes are evaluated and, if authorised, subsequently developed, tested, implemented and reviewed. Final responsibility for the IT service, including changes to it, will rest with the service owner. Change management is accountable for producing and distributing a change schedule and projected service outage (PSO) documents. The change schedule contains details of all the changes authorised for implementation and their proposed implementation dates. Finally, a remediation plan needs to be developed to address a failing change or release long before implementation. Formal authorization is obtained for each change from the appropriate change authority within the meeting. The person accountable for such decisions is usually the change manager, after taking advice from members for the change advisory board. Once that authorization is granted, the change can be built and tested. If this change is part of a release, then the work of packaging the change into a release and building and testing this release is coordinated by the release and deployment management process. For simple changes that are not part of a release, the change management process will coordinate this work. Authorized changes should be passed to the relevant technical groups for building the changes. Change management has an oversight role to ensure that all changes that can be are thoroughly tested. The design, build and testing of the change should be evaluated to ensure that risks have been managed and that predicted and actual performance match the business requirements. The result of this evaluation should be passed to the change authority for formal authorization to deploy the change. The work of deploying a release is part of the release and deployment management process. For simple changes that are not part of a release, the change management process will coordinate this activity. Change management has responsibility for ensuring that changes are deployed as scheduled. This is largely a coordination role, as the actual deployment will be the responsibility of others. Remediation procedures should be prepared and documented in advance for each authorised change, so that if errors occur during or after implementation, these procedures can be quickly activated with minimum impact on service quality. The deployment of changes should be scheduled when the least impact on live services is likely. Before the change is closed, an evaluation must be carried out to ensure that actual performance is acceptable and that there are no unacceptable risks. A change review, e.g. post-implementation review or PIR, should be carried out to confirm that the change has met its objectives, that the initiator and stakeholders are happy with the results, and that there have been no unexpected side effects. Lessons learned should be fed back into future changes. Where a change has not achieved its objectives, change management or the change authority should decide what follow-up action is required, which could involve raising a revised request for change. If the review is satisfactory or the original change is abandoned, e.g. the circumstances that required the change are no longer current and the requirement disappears, the change should be formally closed in the logging system. Many service management processes will also be involved in the impact assessment and implementation of service changes. Capacity management and demand management are critical aspects of change management. Poorly managed demand is a source of cost and risk for service providers because there is always a level of uncertainty associated with the demand for services. Capacity management has an important role in assessing proposed changes. The service portfolio management process prioritises and charters strategic changes and submits change proposals for these. IT service continuity management has many procedures and plans, which should be updated via change management to ensure that they are accurate and up to date. Information security management interfaces with change management, since changes required by security will be implemented through the change management process. As changes are implemented, the configuration management information is updated. Problem management is another key process, as changes are often required to implement workarounds and to fix known errors. Problem management is one of the major sources of requests for change.
The release and deployment process is very closely linked to the change management process to ensure approved changes are successfully packaged and deployed into the live environment. The purpose of the release and deployment management process is to plan, schedule, and control the build, test, and deployment of releases, and to deliver new functionality required by the business while protecting the integrity of existing services. As you would expect, the objectives of release and deployment management are focused upon deployment, but also on protecting the live environment and not causing interruptions to service. They include defining and agreeing release and deployment management plans with customers and stakeholders, creating and testing release packages that consist of related configuration items that are compatible with each other, ensuring that the integrity of a released package and its constituent components is maintained throughout the transition activities, and that all release packages are stored in a definitive media library or DML and are recorded accurately in the configuration management system. Deploying release packages from the definitive media library to the live environment following an agreed plan and schedule, and at the same time ensuring that all release packages can be tracked, installed, tested, verified, and/or uninstalled or backed out if appropriate. Ensuring that a new or changed service and its enabling systems, technology, and organization are capable of delivering the agreed utility and warranty. recording and managing deviations, risks and issues related to the new or changed service and take necessary corrective action. Ensuring that there is knowledge transfer to enable the customers and users to optimize their use of the service to support their business activities. And finally, ensuring that skills and knowledge are transferred to service operation functions to enable them to effectively and efficiently deliver, support, and maintain the service according to required warranties and service levels. The scope of release and deployment management includes the processes, systems, and functions to package, build, test, and deploy a release into live use, establish the service specified in the service design package, and formally hand the service over to the service operation functions. The scope includes all configuration items required to implement a release. Before we begin discussing the processing in more depth, we do need to familiarize ourselves with a few concepts and tools that are relevant to the release and deployment process. Firstly, we need to be aware of the role played by release and deployment policies. Release and deployment management policies should be in place to help the organization achieve the correct balance between cost, service stability, and agility. Release and deployment management policies should help release and deployment management personnel to make decisions that support the overall objectives of the business. These policies can be set at an overall service provider level. For example, all changes and releases must be fully tested under a realistic load before they are deployed. Or for an individual service, for example, all changes to the service will be packaged into annual releases, and the only permitted changes between these releases will be to resolve problems that have a major impact on the business. Taking our IT service here made up of systems and service assets, which are in turn made up of service components, and all are arranged within a functioning hierarchy. The individual components of this service can be grouped into a number of release units and/or release packages. These release units and release packages are defined in terms of their content within the release and deployment policy. A release unit describes the portion of a service or IT infrastructure that is normally released as a single entity according to the organization's release policy. The unit may vary depending on the types or items of service asset or service component, such as software and hardware. It may consist of one component, several, or indeed may make up the whole service. A release package is a set of configuration items that will be built, tested, and deployed together as a single release. Each release will take the documented release units into account when designing the contents of the release package. If you consider a new employee as an example, the release package may be made up of all the hardware and software release units, such as laptop, licenses for Office and email software, and various others. One of the release units may be for different accounts to be created, such as Active Directory and SharePoint, to name but two. This example seeks to illustrate how release units and release packages connect with each other. The key point is that they will be adequately documented in the release policy. Service design will define the approach to transitioning from the current service to the new or changed service. The selected option will have a significant impact on the release and deployment management resources, as well as the business outcomes. There are three groups of options available for release and deployment. They are phased and big bang, push and pull, and automatic and manual. The big bang option is where the new or changed service is deployed to all user areas in one operation. This will often be used when introducing an application change, and consistency of service across the organization is considered important. Examples may include antivirus updates. The phased approach is deployed to a part of the user base initially, and then this operation is repeated for subsequent parts of the user base via a scheduled deployment plan. This will be the case in many scenarios, such as in retail organizations, for new services being introduced into the store's environment in manageable phases. This approach also enables lessons to be learned and assimilated more effectively during the deployment. A push approach is used where the service component is deployed from the center and pushed out to the target locations. In terms of service deployment, delivering updated service components to all users, either in Big Bang or phased form, constitutes push, since the new or changed service is delivered into the user's environment at a time not of their choosing. A pull approach is used for software releases where the software is made available in a central location, but users are free to pull the software down to their own location at a time of their choosing, or when a user workstation restarts. The use of pull updating a release over the internet has made this concept significantly more pervasive. A good example is virus signature updates, which are typically pulled down to update PCs and servers. Finally, automated versus manual refers to the mechanisms used to deploy the releases. Automation will help to ensure repeatability and consistency. The time required to provide a well-designed and efficient automated mechanism may not always be available or viable. If a manual mechanism is used, it is important to monitor and measure the impact of many repeated manual activities, as they are likely to be inefficient and error-prone. Too many manual activities will slow down the release team and create resource or capacity issues that affect the service levels. Now that we have established the key concepts and methods of deployment, let us now look at the 4 phases to release and deployment management. Release and deployment planning. Plans for creating and deploying the release are created. This phase starts with change management authorization to plan a release and ends with change management authorization to create the release. Most of the planning is carried out during the service design stage of the service lifecycle. The activities, though, are carried out as part of the release and deployment management process, and the service design coordination process will ensure that the plans are documented as part of the service design package. Key plans that would be considered here would include plans for establishing pass-fail criteria, planning the release packaging and build, preparing for release build and test, deployment planning, logistics and delivery planning, planning of pilots, financial, commercial planning. During the release build and test stage, the common services and infrastructure need to be managed carefully, since they can significantly affect the build and test of a technology-enabled service and its underlying technology infrastructure. The definitive version of the release package, authorized by change management, must be placed in the definitive media library, even where the release package consists only of documentation for a hardware upgrade. The release package must always be taken from the definitive media library to deploy to the service operation readiness, service acceptance, and live environments. Other key considerations in this phase include release and build documentation, acquiring and testing input configuration items and components, release packaging, service testing and pilot scheduling, building and managing the test environments, preparing for service rehearsals, pilot's delivery. In this phase, the release package, which was deposited in the definitive media library, is now deployed to the live environment. This phase starts with change management authorization to deploy the release package to one or more target environments, and ends with handover to the service operation functions and early life support. There may be many separate deployment phases for each release, depending on the planned deployment options. In this phase, experience and feedback are captured, performance targets and achievements are reviewed, and lessons are learned.
This section addresses the process of service asset and configuration management within IT service management. No organisation can be fully efficient or effective unless it manages its assets well, particularly those assets that are vital to the running of the customer's or organisation's business. The purpose of the service asset and configuration management process is to ensure that the assets required to deliver services are properly controlled, and that accurate and reliable information about those assets is available when and where it is needed. This information includes details of how the assets have been configured and the relationships between assets. There are several objectives of service asset and configuration management. They are focused on ensuring that assets under the control of the IT organisation are identified, controlled and properly cared for throughout their life cycle. Identifying, controlling, recording, reporting, auditing and verifying services and other configuration items, including versions, baselines, constituent components, their attributes and relationships. Accounting for, managing and protecting the integrity of configuration items through the service lifecycle by working with change management to ensure that only authorized components are used and only authorized changes are made. Ensuring that the integrity of configuration items and configurations required to control the services is achieved by establishing and maintaining an accurate and complete configuration management system or CMS. Maintaining accurate configuration information on the historical, planned and current state of services and other configuration items. Finally, to support efficient and effective service management processes by providing accurate configuration information to enable people to make decisions at the right time, for example, to authorize changes and releases or to resolve incidents and problems. The scope of service asset and configuration management process includes management of the complete life cycle of every configuration item to ensure that all configuration items are identified, baselined and maintained, and that changes to them are controlled. The scope also includes the interfaces to internal and external service providers, where there are assets and configuration items that need to be controlled, as well as maintaining a well-defined interface between service asset and configuration management and the organization's fixed asset management. As with other ITIL processes, there are a number of basic concepts that we need to be familiar with first. It is important to distinguish between service assets, configuration items, and configuration records, as these concepts are often confused. Firstly, a service asset is any resource or capability that could contribute to the delivery of a service. Examples of service assets include a virtual server, a physical server, a software license, a piece of information stored in a service management system, or some knowledge in the head of a senior manager. A configuration item or CI is a service asset that needs to be managed in order to deliver an IT service. All CIs are service assets, but many service assets are not configuration items. Examples of configuration items are a server or a software license. Every CI must be under the control of change management. An attribute is a piece of data relating to a configuration item. Examples could include serial numbers, memory size, or owner. A configuration record is a set of attributes and relationships about a configuration item. Configuration records are stored in a configuration management database or CMDB and managed with a configuration management system or CMS. It is important to note that configuration items are not stored in a configuration management database. Configuration records describe configuration items that are stored in the configuration management database. In hierarchical terms, a collection of attributes makes up a configuration item record. A collection of configuration records makes up a configuration management database. A collection of configuration management databases makes up a configuration management system. To manage large and complex IT services and infrastructures, service asset and configuration management requires the use of a supporting system known as the Configuration Management System, or CMS. The Configuration Management System holds all the information about configuration items within the designated scope of the IT service provider's scope. Changes to every configuration item must be authorized by change management, and all updates must include updates to the relevant configuration records. The Configuration Management System maintains the relationships between all service components, and may also include records for related incidents, problems, known errors, changes and releases. The configuration management system may also link to corporate data about employees, suppliers, locations and business units, customers and users. Alternatively, the configuration management system may hold copies of this information, depending on the capabilities of the tools in use. At the data level, the CMS may include data from configuration records stored in several physical configuration management databases. Records used to support service management processes, such as incident records, problem records, change records, release records, and known error records, must be associated with the specific configuration items that they relate to. Many implementations include these records within their configuration management system. As mentioned, items that are checked into the definitive media library will be the definitive authorized versions of media configuration items. A configuration baseline is the configuration of a service, product or infrastructure that has been formally reviewed and agreed, which thereafter serves as the basis for further activities and can be changed only through formal change procedures. It captures the structure, contents and details of a configuration and represents a set of configuration items that are related to each other. Baselines must not be confused with snapshots. A snapshot is the current state of a configuration item or an environment, e.g. from a discovery tool. This snapshot is recorded in the configuration management system and remains as a fixed historical record. Sometimes this is referred to as a footprint. A snapshot is not necessarily formally reviewed and agreed on. It is just a documentation of a state, which may contain false and unauthorized configuration items. One configuration management database that will always be part of the configuration management system is the Definitive Media Library. The Definitive Media Library, or DML, is the secure library in which the definitive authorized versions of all media CIs are stored and protected. It stores master copies of versions that have passed quality assurance checks. This library may in reality consist of one or more software libraries or file storage areas, separate from development, test, or live file store areas. It contains the master copies of all controlled software in an organization. The Definitive Media Library should include definitive copies of purchased software, along with license documents or information, as well as software developed on-site. Master copies of control documentation for a system are also stored in the Definitive Media Library in electronic form. The Definitive Media Library will also include a physical store to hold master copies, e.g. a fireproof safe. Only authorized media should be accepted into the Definitive Media Library, strictly controlled by the service asset and configuration management process. The Definitive Media Library is a foundation for the release and deployment management process. The exact configuration of the Definitive Media Library is defined during the planning activities.
The ability to deliver a quality service or process relies significantly on the ability of various parties to respond to circumstances that are presented. For example, comments received such as, "The product functionality is not as expected," or "The system is slower than before." The quality of the response to such comments will rest heavily on the service knowledge of those tasked with facilitating a service. That knowledge might be quite wide-ranging, and within a service transition might include information on the identity of stakeholders or the acceptable levels of risk and expected levels of performance regarding a service, as well as the availability and suitability of resources and their timescales. The quality and relevance of the knowledge rests in turn on the accessibility, quality, and continued relevance of the underpinning data and information available to service staff. The purpose of the knowledge management process is to share perspectives, ideas, experience, and information to ensure that these are available in the right place at the right time to enable informed decisions, and to improve efficiency by reducing the need to rediscover knowledge. The objectives in support of delivering and enabling an effective knowledge management process are to improve the quality of management decision-making by ensuring that reliable and secure knowledge, information, and data is available throughout the service lifecycle. Enable the service provider to be more efficient and improve quality of service, increase satisfaction, and reduce the cost of service by reducing the need to rediscover knowledge. Ensure that staff have a clear and common understanding of the value that their services provide to customers and the ways in which benefits are realized from the use of those services. Maintain a Service Knowledge Management System, or SKMS, that provides controlled access to knowledge, information, and data that is appropriate for each audience. Gather, analyze, store, share, use, and maintain knowledge, information, and data throughout the service provider organization. The scope of knowledge management is across the whole service lifecycle and involves all processes. It is relevant to all lifecycle stages and hence is referenced throughout ITIL from the perspective of each publication. Knowledge management includes oversight of the management of data, information, and the knowledge which is shared across the lifecycle. Data is a set of discrete facts. Most organizations capture significant amounts of data in highly structured databases, such as server log files, for example. The key activities are the ability to capture accurate data, analyze it, and transform it into something more usable as information. The integrity of data should be maintained at all times, and where necessary, it should be archived and purged to ensure that the data stored is relevant to the uses expected of it. In this example, we will assume the data being captured is the amount of free disk space on the server, including the date and time at which the free space was logged. Information comes from providing context to data. The key knowledge management activity around information is managing the content in a way that makes it easy to capture, query, find, reuse, and learn from experiences so that mistakes are not repeated and work is not duplicated. Continuing the example, arranging the data regarding free disk space over time so that a pattern of free disk space and usage would be presented. This information is created by combining data from the date and time entries of several pieces of data. Knowledge is composed of the tacit experiences, ideas, insights, values, judgments, and experiences of individuals. People gain knowledge both from their own and from their peers' expertise, as well as from the analysis of information and data. Through the synthesis of these elements, new knowledge is created. Knowledge is dynamic and context-based and is gathered from experience of previous transitions, awareness of recent and anticipated changes, and other areas which experienced staff will have been unconsciously collecting for some time. In our example, there may be a dip in free disk space, but experience tells us that there are no housekeeping routines running on the server and that it is a regular pattern of usage that is within acceptable levels. Wisdom makes use of knowledge to create value through correct and well-informed decisions. Wisdom involves having the application and contextual awareness to provide strong common-sense judgment. Wisdom is essentially validating and sharing the knowledge. Specifically within IT service management, knowledge management will be focused within the Service Knowledge Management System, which is concerned, as its name implies, with knowledge. Underpinning this knowledge will be a considerable quantity of data, which will also be held in the Service Knowledge Management System. Information relating to configuration items will be collected into a series of configuration management databases, or CMDBs. Databases such as the Service Portfolio, Capacity Management Information System, Availability Management Information System, Supplier and Contracts Management Information System, and the Information Security Management System. These are just a few of the databases that will collectively make up the Configuration Management System. All of these are used in supporting the delivery of a service. The The Service Knowledge Management System is a wider concept than the Configuration Management System. It will additionally include information that is non-IT in nature, but nonetheless useful to those tasked with delivery and support of a service. Items that would be additionally included would typically be service reports, discussion forums where practitioners can ask questions, answer each other's questions, and search for previous questions and answers. An indexed and searchable repository of project plans from previous projects. A known error database provided by a vendor which lists common issues in their product and how to resolve them. Skills register and typical and anticipated user skill levels. A managed set of web-based training courses. Weather reports needed to support business and IT decision-making. For example, an organization may need to know whether rain is likely at the time of an outdoor event. Customer-user personal information. For example, to support a blind user who needs to have specific support from the service desk. All of these are used in supporting the decisions made during the delivery of a service.
Adopting and implementing standard and consistent approaches for service transition will enable projects to estimate the cost, timing, resource requirement and risks associated with the service transition stage more accurately. Result in higher volumes of successful change. Be easier for people to adopt and follow. Enable service transition assets to be shared and reused across projects and services. Reduce delays from unexpected clashes and dependencies. For example, if multiple projects need to use the same test environment at the same time. Reduce the effort spent on managing the service transition test and pilot environments. Improve expectation setting for all stakeholders involved in service transition, including customers, users, suppliers, partners, and projects. Increase confidence that the new or changed service can be delivered to specification without unexpectedly affecting other services or stakeholders. Ensure that new or changed services will be maintainable and cost-effective. Improve control of service assets and configurations. This completes the lessons within this module. You should take the opportunity to reflect back against the module objectives. Consider whether these objectives have been met and whether you need to review any of the lessons. When you are comfortable with having completed the module learning, you can progress to the next module.